Hi, my name is Josephine Dolston and I'm filming live today for JTA News. I'm on the Lower East Side in New York and we're going to be visiting a really special synagogue here. It's a Greek synagogue made by Greek Jewish immigrants to New York, and they're not just any type of Greek Jews. They belong to a very special community, and it's called the Romaneochews Jewish community, and this synagogue is the only Romaneochews Jewish synagogue in the entire Western Hemisphere. So I'm right outside on the street, and we're going to go inside and get a tour and learn more about this very special community. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to write and I'll try to ask our tour guide. Like I said, I'm Josephine Dolson for JT News, and I'm going to flip so you guys can see the exterior. So this is the synagogue here. And this neighborhood used to have a lot of Jews living here, and today it's changed quite a lot. As you can see from all the graffiti, it's a modern, hip neighborhood. And we're going to go inside and learn more about the synagogue. I'm going to show you a sign. There's a sign describing the synagogue. Alright, so let's go inside and see what it looks like. Hello!
Welcome!
Thank you! So we're entering inside the synagogue now, and here's our tour guide for the day, Andrew Marcus, who's the Director of Community Development here. Hi, Andrew.
Welcome, welcome.
Thanks for joining us today.
Of course.
We're really excited. So tell us a little bit more about where we are right now.
Sure. So, welcome to Kehila Kedosha Janina, the holy community of Janina. We are the only Greek-Jewish Romanian synagogue in the entire Western Hemisphere.
Wow. That's crazy. Did there used to be other ones and something happened to them?
So, the building you're in right now was built in 1927 here on the Lower East Side, but about 100 years ago, back in the turn of the century, the Lower East Side, as you know, had hundreds of thousands of Jewish immigrants from all over the world, and this section around Broome and Allen Street actually had a really strong concentration of Jews from Greece, from Turkey, and from the Balkans. And so there actually were other small Sephardic synagogues and a couple other minyans around, but after changes in the neighborhood over the past basically 90 years, we're the last remaining Greek Jewish synagogue and basically non-Ashkenazi synagogue on the Lower East Side.
Wow. And you're going to have to explain to us later about, what all these things mean and what this community, what Romaneochews means.
Absolutely.
So we're really excited. Just going to show everyone here. All right, so let's just walk inside slowly and
so come on in. Like I said, the synagogue you see right now was built in 1927. We restored the interior and the exterior about 10 years ago, so everything you see is as close to original as possible. You see, because of the size of the buildings on the Lower East Side, the synagogue is pretty narrow because the property itself is narrow. And the design, the bima is in the middle, typical of most Sephardic synagogues. So they had to adapt some of the customs to fit within the constraints of the synagogue structure. But the benches were handmade by congregants back in 1927.
Wow.
The floor was originally covered with linoleum through the late 2000s. And we actually picked it up during the restoration, discovered the original wood floor, and restored it. So that's original. The ceiling above is tin and was actually restored by the same company that built it back in 1927. So essentially, you're taking a step back in time to the turn of the century when the Lower East Side was basically the densest community in the world and was basically the most diverse Jewish community in the world.
Wow, it's amazing to be here.
So come a little bit this way. You're probably wondering, some people don't know that there are Jews in Greece, some people don't know the history, but actually Jews in Greece had the distinction of having the longest continuous presence of Jews in the European diaspora. Jews in Greece go back over 2,300 years to the time of Alexander the Great, and they go back to the time when actually Greece was controlled by the Roman Empire, and they were citizens of Rome, and so that's where the term that the scholars came up with, Romaneochews, comes from, because they date back to the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire.
So is that a term that the community uses to describe itself, or more of a scholarly term?
It's more of a scholarly term. most of the Jews that came from Greece before the Spanish Inquisition would refer to themselves usually by the cities they came from. So this synagogue, Kehila Kedosha Janina, is named after the city in Greece, in northwestern Greece, called Janina, because that was one of the hubs of Romaneochews Jewry. And another way to think of the distinction is that Romaneochews spoke Greek at home. They didn't speak Spanish like the Sephardic Jews, which I'll mention, and they didn't speak Yiddish because they weren't Ashkenazi.
Wow.
So essentially this community is a minority within a minority. The Romaneochews spoke Greek, lived among Greek Christians, and even before Greece was a Greek Christian country, and have been in Greece for over 2,000 years, like I mentioned.
That's a really rich heritage. Is that where your family comes from?
Actually, on my father's side, yes. My grandfather was born in Greece, in a town outside of Thessaloniki or Salonika, and he came here in 1920. So one distinction I'll start telling you about is the difference between the Greek-speaking Romaneochews and the Spanish-speaking Sephardic Jews. So my family is actually Sephardic. My father's family grew up right here on the Lower East Side, and I was born and raised in this community. But, like I mentioned, the Greek-speaking Jews were in Greece for over 2,000 years. In fact, they developed their own customs, traditions, incorporated a lot of the Greek culture, the cuisine, the language, like I mentioned, into their practice of Judaism, while still maintaining all full Jewish traditions. But, as you know your history, hopefully, in 1492, Jews were expelled from Spain, and in 1496 from Portugal. And at that time, Greece and the Balkans and Turkey were controlled by the Ottoman Empire. So as Jews were forced to flee or convert to Christianity in Spain, there was a major influx of Spanish-speaking Jews to what is now Greece and Turkey. And they basically overwhelmed a lot of the cities where there were historic smaller Jewish communities, including in Greece. So major hubs like Thessaloniki, Salonika, Istanbul, Izmir, other parts of Greece like Rhodes, became major hubs of Spanish-speaking Jewish communities. However, there were some cities in Greece, like Ioannina, where this community is from, like Arta and Preveza, that retained the indigenous Romaneot traditions. So, fast forward after 1492, through the 1900s, there was not necessarily a tension, but a distinction between those indigenous Greek-speaking Romaneot Jews and the more populated Spanish Jews throughout that region. And so this community kept its traditions despite the changes around it for centuries. And in the early 1900s, like other immigrants from around the world, they came here for greater economic opportunity because of changes with the decline of the Ottoman Empire. And so they came here for a better life while still keeping their traditions alive.
Wow, amazing.
So my family, like I said, was Spanish-speaking. The Sephardic Jews from Spain spoke what we call today Ladino, which is an older form of Castilian Spanish, but incorporated Greek and Hebrew and Turkish. But these Romaneochews spoke Greek, like I mentioned. But as the community on the Lower East Side evolved up through World War II and afterwards, people, as they moved up the economic ladder, spread further out into the New York City area, the suburbs, and so the Lower East Side changed. Many of the other smaller Sephardic synagogues moved or closed, and so those that were left in the neighborhood, whether from Greece or from the broader Balkan area that were not Ashkenazi, ended up consolidating into this synagogue, and that's how my father's family ended up coming here and how I ended up becoming a part of the community.
Great. I was curious to know whether there were, in Greece or when they moved here, any tensions between the different Jews, like the Romaneochews and the Ladino or Sephardic Jews?
Sure. So what I've been taught is that they weren't necessarily competing, but there was definitely a distinction among the traditions and the communities. Even through the 1920s and 30s here in New York, marrying a Romaneot Jew marrying a Sephardic Jew was sometimes considered intermarriage.
Really?
Because they spoke different languages, they had slightly different customs. In fact, because the customs were that distinct enough, they found it important enough to create their own synagogue so that they could maintain the liturgy, the melodies. They have unique Greek and Hebrew piyutim that we sing on holidays that were very different from the traditions of the Jews from Spain. So they definitely cooperated. They traded throughout the cities in Greece and the Balkans for centuries. They interacted, but for the most part, they maintained their own distinct communities. And it wasn't until up till World War II and here in America, and then afterwards here and in Greece, that the communities became more integrated formally with the development of the modern Greek state.
I see. That's interesting. We're getting a lot of viewers who are just very excited that we're here and thanking us for filming this. So it's
Welcome.
Great. Yeah, it's great. You guys should come by and visit if you're on New York's Lower East Side.
So you might see some features that are a little different. Like I mentioned, the bima is in the middle of the synagogue, which is typical of most Sephardic synagogues. We conduct the services here in the middle. The front is the Ark, the Aron HaKodesh, that contains the Sifrei Torah, the Torah scrolls. The lights that you see on the wall are actually memorial plaques for people who have passed away. And we light the lights around the anniversary of their passing, so we say memorial prayers. Usually their families come and say memorial prayers for their departed members to honor their memory. You'll also see we are a traditional synagogue, so during the services, men actually sit downstairs, and we have a balcony upstairs, which we'll see in a little bit, and that's where women sit during the services. If you want to come a little bit this way, one feature that cuts across cultures and different faiths in the Balkans and Middle East, you'll see these hanging lamps. So most people know that in every synagogue there's a ner tamid, an eternal lamp, that recalls the eternal flame in the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, and we have that up in the front. But these other lamps, people think are eternal lamps also, but they're actually memorial lamps that people have donated over the years to commemorate the passing of a loved one. And these are traditions that actually you can see in Greek Orthodox churches. You'll see them in some historic Ottoman mosques. And so you can begin to get a sense of how some of the cultural influences crossed different communities, whether they were Jewish, whether they were Turkish, whether they were Muslim or Christian, and how they got incorporated into the practice of Judaism by these Greek-speaking Romaneochews.
That's fascinating. What was it like for the Jews living in Greece? I'm sure it changed over history, but did they face a lot of anti-Semitism, or? So,
generally speaking, the Jews that lived under the Ottoman Empire fared better than those who lived in Christian-controlled Ashkenazi, Northern or Eastern European lands. So, actually, as I mentioned, after the Jews were expelled from Spain, it was the Ottoman Sultan who invited the Jews to come and develop a lot of the cities and trades of the newly growing Ottoman Empire. And because of the system of the Ottoman Empire of allowing minorities to basically run their own internal affairs, it's called the Millet System, the Jewish communities throughout Greece and the Balkans, including the Romaneochews, were pretty self-sustaining and thankfully did not suffer nearly as much persecution or anti-Semitism as other communities in Christian-controlled lands.
Interesting.
For the Greek-speaking Jews especially, they had centuries of cooperation. There was never any ghettos in Greece, so Greek-speaking Jews as well as Sephardic Jews lived side by side with their Christian and Muslim neighbors for centuries. They traded together, they interacted with each other. We have stories from different rabbis, especially one famous one named Rabbi Moshe Pesach, who was a rabbi in the city of Volos. His family was actually Romaneot. He has a very incredible story of surviving the war, which I might tell you about a little later. But we've had stories from members of the community who came here from Greece who told us that on Passover, the Greek Orthodox priest from that town would come and honor the rabbi in the town and pay respects for the holiday. And on Easter, Rabbi Pesach would go visit the Greek Orthodox Church as well. So there are many, many stories of cooperative relationships and coexistence that we try to continue here today in our community and keep a broader perspective for those who come from areas that had more persecution historically.
Oh, it'd be interesting to know how you said, you mentioned that that's something you guys keep on doing today.
Sure. So actually, every May we host an annual Greek-Jewish festival right here on Broome Street in front of our synagogue. We close the street down, we have live music, professional dance performers, tons of delicious kosher Greek and Sephardic food, vendors, community groups, kids activities, the whole 9 yards. We had 8,000 people last year, But one way that we try to show that the community is not isolated, we're not necessarily closed off like some other communities, is that we continue to partner, and we've had very close relations for decades with an actual nearby Greek Orthodox church called St. Barbara.
Wow.
That's only 5 blocks away here on the Lower East Side. So they're always partners in our festival. We always work with the Greek Consul General and the Greek Orthodox Archbishop here in America. They commemorate the Holocaust every year, and we try to foster cooperative relations with all of our neighbors. So we try to keep that tradition going.
Amazing. All right.
So let me show you a little bit more. One unique tradition for the Romaneochews compared to some of the Sephardic communities from other parts of the Balkans or from the West and Ashkenazi communities is that we keep our Torah scrolls in boxes called teaks that are usually wooden or have some metal decorations. So I'm going to show you now a couple of our Torah scrolls.
Great. Wow, this is so beautiful.
So some of these were donated after the synagogue was formed, but one of them actually, the white one in the back that you see, actually came from Greece and was brought here in honor of the new community forming here on the Lower East Side. And the style of calligraphy is actually very unique to Greek Jews compared to any other community in the world. And we've been told by expert scribes that that white Torah scroll dates back to 1780.
Wow.
So,
and it's still in good condition?
Thank God it's still in very good condition. So we try our best to maintain it, to keep using it. And you see we keep up the traditions of the Torah scrolls in round cases with the Torah crowns called Romanian.
How many do you have in here? So
we have about 7 different Torah scrolls.
wow. That's amazing. And do you hold services here?
We still have services every Shabbat, as well as all Jewish holidays, so we're still a functioning, live, active synagogue. On Sundays, actually, is when we are open to the public as a museum, and I'll take you upstairs in a little bit, because we have a full array of exhibits about the history of the community, the traditions, and allow people, Jews and non-Jews, to learn more about the unique history of Romaneochews.
That's amazing. So beautiful. Thank you for showing us.
Of course. So one unfortunate part of Greek Jewish history that I'll mention is the experience of Greek Jews in the Holocaust.
Okay.
Most people don't realize, but Nazi Germany invaded and occupied Greece during the war. It was broken up into different zones of occupation, including the Italian occupation and Bulgarian occupation. But the tragedy is that Greece has the terrible distinction of losing the greatest percentage of its Jews than any community in Europe.
Wow.
87% of the Jews of Greece perished in the Holocaust. And that, I mean, almost entire communities were decimated, like in Thessaloniki, in Yanina, the community was very decimated. In other parts of Greece, all major cities, unfortunately, the Nazis were ruthless and went to every small town, every historic island where there were Greek Jews. And it's a heavy legacy that Greek Jews are living with in Greece today, as well as in the diaspora. So we have members of our community who survived as hidden children who came here in the 1950s and are still members of our community. There's, unfortunately, stories of collaboration, but there are a lot of great stories of righteous Gentiles who saved Greek Jewish families. Like I mentioned, we have members of our community still here today who were saved by the generosity of their Greek Christian neighbors. One beautiful story is the island of Zaquentos, which had a Romaneoch, Greek-speaking Jewish community for centuries. Their leaders, the story goes, that the mayor and the police chief were told by the German occupiers, give us a list of the Jews of the island. And so the mayor bought an extra day or two, told the Jews to go hide among the villagers throughout the island. And when the Nazis came back, the mayor and the police chief gave a list to the German officer, and said, "Here are the names of the Jews," and it had the names of the mayor and the police chief. So he said, "If you want to take the Jews, you take us." And that was the only place where the entire Jewish community survived because of the bravery of their Greek Christian neighbors. Other cities, of course, individuals worked to hide their neighbors. The Greek Orthodox Church was actually the only church in Europe to come out formally protesting the Nazi conditions that they were putting on the Jews and the persecution of the Jews. Archbishop Damaskinos is the famous Archbishop of Greece, who issued a decree to all of the priests in the Greek Orthodox Church to do all that they could to help save Greek Jews during the war. So there are amazing stories of survival and heroism despite the heavy losses.
Wow. And the community here, is it mostly comprised of people who came before the war or after the war?
That's a good question. It's a mix. As you can imagine, the older generations that came here in the turn of the century, they used to live across the street in the tenements that you saw.
Wow.
Today, their children and grandchildren live throughout the tri-state area in New York City. So they don't necessarily come every week, but they come on holidays, they come for special events or memorials for their family members. They're still a core part of our community, but as I mentioned, after World War II, with the challenges that the Greek community was facing in rebuilding, some Jews went to Israel, some Jews came here to America, to New York, and they were incorporated into our community and to some other Balkan Sephardic communities in the broader New York area. And so they still are, of course, a part of our community, and we don't actually have a formal membership list. We don't charge membership for our synagogue. So
that's very rare in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, that's the tradition. People make donations. We're sustained by individual donations throughout the year. When people have special occasions like bar mitzvahs or memorials, they usually make a donation or sponsor a kiddush here in the synagogue. So we don't have a specific breakdown of Jews that came before the war or afterwards, but we do have a monthly email newsletter that goes out to over 8,000 households all around the world. So we've become not only a synagogue, but a refuge and a center for Greek Jewish life and history and culture. And so we try to keep the community together, even though we might be more dispersed than we were 100 years ago.
It's amazing. I was going to ask, if someone comes to visit here who's not familiar with, Greek Jewish customs or Romaneochews Jewish customs, if they come for a Shabbat service or any service, would it be very different?
I mean, if you're Ashkenazi, the melodies would be quite different.
Okay.
But for the most part, the service is all in Hebrew. There are a couple of prayers we say on holidays that we might say in Greek or in Ladino for the Sephardic portions of our congregation. But the service is closely aligned with basically the text of the Sephardic prayers. The melodies are a little bit different, so you'll hear some different chanting. Like I mentioned, in the influence of other cultures, especially on the holidays, the way we chant our prayers is very closely similar to the way actual Greek Orthodox churches chant their prayers in the almost Byzantine mode of music.
Wow.
So people should be, any Jew is always welcome to join us for services. You can definitely follow along. Our prayer books are in English and Hebrew, and we have some in Greek too. But the melodies are the biggest difference that people might experience.
We're getting a question about Passover traditions and food.
Of course.
For those who might not be familiar, different Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews, for example, follow different customs with Sephardic Jews, at least some groups eating rice and other types of lentils and beans that Ashkenazi Jews don't eat. So Katerina's asking, what are specific Passover traditions and food?
Sure. So I think across the Romaneochews and the Sephardics, it was customary on the first night of Passover to eat lamb, even though some Ashkenazi communities don't do that explicitly for their own reasons. But that, the cuisine of Jews from Greece is basically the Mediterranean diet. All fresh vegetables, lamb, feta cheese, all the different cheeses, very healthy olive oil, tomatoes, all those things. For Passover, the dishes I can list them all off. They're all amazing. We're all getting ready here in the community. Like I said, lamb was very customary. My family makes basically pies. In Spanish, we call them minas. We make them out of ground beef and onions and dill and sometimes potatoes on top. So it's kind of like a shepherd's pie. That's mina de carne. And we also make separately spinach pie, mina de spinaca, that includes spinach and feta cheese and different cheeses, matzah and egg. And so those we'll eat throughout the week. Both communities make what are called, they're leek patties, basically like little burgers. In Greek,
you're making me hungry. This is so delicious sounding.
In Greek, they're prasa kefteres. In Ladino, it's keftikas de prasa, like patties of leeks. And so it's ground beef and leeks fried. And so we eat those. Most of the community in Greece, whether Sephardic or Ashkenazi, did not eat rice on Passover. We would eat fresh beans, like fava beans, but not dried beans. I'm unfortunately not an expert in all of the history, but for various reasons we didn't eat corn or other things like that. But we ate a lot of fresh vegetables throughout the week.
Sounds delicious and healthy.
Oh yeah. And throughout the year we eat a lot of other great stuff like stewed okra, bamia, we eat borekas, we eat kluria, bizcochos, all different types of foods. And if you you visit us any Shabbat, we usually have a traditional lunch afterwards. You'll actually get a taste of some of our cuisine. But if you come also on May 6th for our Greek Jewish festival, you can eat to your heart's delight because we'll have tons of food out in the street for you to enjoy with the music and dancing.
Amazing. All right. I think I'm definitely going to have to come for Shabbat now.
So if you follow me, we're going to go upstairs a little bit. I'll show you a little bit of the museum and tell you more about our customs.
One viewer, Michael, says Greek food is amazing. Do you agree?
100%. It's amazing.
Of course.
I'll tell you, for Passover, traditionally we did not eat matzah balls. So that's definitely an Ashkenazi custom.
Yeah, for sure.
So one thing we like to show people, if you might have noticed in the lobby when you come in, back in 1927 when they built the building,
okay,
for $100 you could get your name on the wall in marble in perpetuity. So
oh, this.
Yeah, so it shows the history of what it took to build this building.
Wow.
And back in 1920s, around the Depression, $100 was not inexpensive. It was a significant amount of money. And when the Jews came here from Greece in the turn of the century, they had to work hard. They weren't wealthy, but they hustled like all the other Jews on the Lower East Side and built a community and grew their families to move up the economic ladder.
Another viewer asks, are there any famous Romanian rabbis?
So I mentioned one, Rabbi Moshe Pesach. There are hundreds of rabbis from Greece going back centuries. Some people might know Rabbi Yosef Karo. He was from Salonika and then eventually, I believe, went to Israel, but he's the famous author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, that is basically one of the most preeminent codes of Jewish law today, and he was a Sephardic Jew from Salonika in Greece at the time. Mm-hmm. But there are many, many other famous Greek Jews that were rabbis. I'll also mention that a number of the rabbis during the war, including Rabbi Moshe Pesach, somehow coordinated and collaborated with the Greek resistance during World War II. And so there's different stories for each community, but Rabbi Pesach was actually awarded after the war because of his service in the resistance and helping Jews flee the Nazis while they were attempting to deport the Jews of Volos.
What are these proclamations here?
These are different awards and recognitions we've received from New York City Council over the years. We're actually a New York City designated landmark, and so these are just recognizing the historic value of our synagogue and community and the broader diversity of New York City.
Great. So now we're heading upstairs.
Another fun fact we like to mention is that back in the turn of the century, when the Lower East Side was packed with Jewish immigrants, almost every block had its own synagogue. So we actually have these original map plates of the Lower East Side. We are right here, and if you look closely, it still says synagogue. That's where we are today. But if you look around and you come in person and see more, you'll see on almost every block there was another synagogue, because every town that Jews came from formed their own congregation to maintain their unique traditions.
Every town that they came from in Europe, you mean?
Yeah, not just Greece, but all over Europe.
I see, wow.
But today, as the Lower East Side changed over decades, we are one of only about 10 synagogues on the Lower East Side and one of only a handful that are the historic congregations going back 100 years.
Wow.
So within Greek Jewish world, we're unique, but also in the Lower East Side, our story is becoming even more valuable because the neighborhoods change, different immigrant communities moved here, and so the history of the Jewish Lower East Side is slowly fading. So like I mentioned, the second floor is where the women usually sit during services, but on Sundays is when you can come up here and actually tour our museum. We have a whole variety of books and gifts for sale, all about Greek jewelry. We actually have the largest collection of books in English for sale about Greek Jews anywhere in the United States. We have book signings, film screenings, all different types of educational programs throughout the year. We have cooking classes sometimes too.
Oh,
So
that sounds like fun.
definitely those who are interested in learning more about Greek Jewish cuisine can go on our website and sign up for our newsletter, and you can come anytime you're interested in learning more about our traditions.
Wow.
So let me show you a little bit of the exhibits.
Yeah, there are a lot of pictures and items here that are really beautiful.
This exhibit with the blue boards on the right wall is basically focusing on the world that the Jews left behind in Greece and the world that they found when they came to America. So you can see here some pictures of the different towns and cities that they came from, like Yanina at the turn of the century, in Salonika, in Athens, in Crete, in Rhodes, in Kastoria, in Corfu. These were all historic Jewish communities in Greece, both Romanian and Sephardic. And then you can see they go across the ocean to Ellis Island, go through immigration here. We have some photos I'll show you a little later of what the Lower East Side looked like in the early 1900s and when they first built this synagogue.
Amazing. I'm curious to know, it sounds like Jews lived in a lot of different cities. Were they concentrated in certain areas or were they all over Greece?
I mean, Jews were, from my understanding, in cities all over Greece. They weren't necessarily limited to certain regions. You have to remember, for almost 400 to 500 years, Greece, what is Greece today, was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. So there weren't necessarily formal borders or divisions. It was more so cities and concentrations of trade and business activity. So wherever there was an opportunity, Jews formed communities and Jews helped really build up the city of Salonika once there was that influx after the Spanish Inquisition. And they developed in cities all around Greece and the Balkans. So right here I'll show you a traditional wedding dress from the 1800s from the Negrin family from Larissa.
That's really beautiful.
You'll see I'll show you in a little bit, some more exhibits about the costumes and traditional clothing of Jews from Greece. Here we have an exhibit about Rabbi Matsuyak Matsil. He was born in Yanina and then came here to New York in the early 20th century. He was a rabbi and a moel, and he actually did the circumcisions for a number of the original founding families in the turn of the century. This book right here is actually a catalog of all the different baby boys that he did, the Brit Milan. And these are his utensils. This is a hand-carved shofar from Yanina, and this is an outfit that baby boys would wear during the Brit Milan.
Wow.
And here's a picture of the Torah scrolls in the synagogue in the city of Yanina today. And you can see the traditions, how they were brought from this city here to New York to our synagogue, and that we maintain them still in the round cases with the Torah crowns, the Romaneochews.
Amazing. And Katerina asks, how many Jews are there in Greece today?
Today there are about 5,000 Jews throughout Greece. They're mainly concentrated in Salonika, and Thessaloniki, and in Athens. And there are very small communities in some other historic cities like Yanina.
And are those Romaneochews or what kind of Jews?
In Salonika, they're mainly Sephardic Jews because that was basically the hub of Spanish-speaking Jewry. It was 100 years ago, it was called the Mother of Israel, La Madre de Israel, the Jerusalem of the Balkans. So those that did survive the Holocaust, that remained and helped rebuild the community in Salonika, were primarily Spanish-speaking. In Athens, that community was actually more modern. That was formed with the growth of the modern Greek state, and that community in Athens today is integrated Greek-speaking Romaneochews and Sephardic Jews.
Interesting. Thanks for answering all our questions. And
we have another wedding dress right here from the Negrin family from 1890.
That's a really beautiful dress. Did they tend to be in certain colors? Today we associate wedding dresses with white, but this one's gold and peach.
Well, they definitely didn't only wear white. Depending on the traditions and the era, you can see the influence of different Ottoman, Turkish styles compared to what might be more Western style dress today. So it definitely varied from what we're used to today. Here's a Pesach Seder tray from Janina in terms of traditions that are coming up for Passover.
That's beautiful.
Another custom of the Jews from Janina was that with the dowry of every new marriage, the wife's father would be expected to give Megillat Esther to the new husband. And so we have a collection of 3 here, but even more, handmade silver Megillot. And we're very proud of them and the traditions, and you can see the detail of the silver work.
Yeah, so this is the book of Esther, that the story that Jews tend to read on Purim. And is that a custom? I haven't heard of that custom before as being part of the wedding dowry.
Yes, that was very traditional for the Romaneochews communities. There were many other things that they would include in the dowry, but this is one unique thing that we feature here.
It's amazing. We have a few questions, and I believe you answered these in the beginning, but some viewers might be tuning in a little bit later. One viewer, Ruth, asked about how did the name Romaneochews develop and where did it come from? And another viewer, Ita, writes, what does Janina mean?
Sure. So the name of the synagogue we're in is Kehila Kedosha Janina, the holy community of Janina. Janina is the name of the city in northwest Greece that the founding members of this community primarily came from. Romaneochews is more of a scholarly term, and it refers to the Greek-speaking Jews that go back over 2,000 years in Greece to what was then the Eastern Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire. So they're called Romaneochews because they were citizens of that Roman Empire at the time. But generally, the Jews from Janina would refer to themselves as Janiots, or Jews from the city of Janina, but now we use it interchangeably. So the distinction is really Romaneochews are Greek-speaking, they spoke Greek at home. The Sephardic Jews spoke Spanish at home, and then of course the Ashkenazi spoke Yiddish and the rest of the world.
Right.
So here you can see some more features of the traditional outfits of Jews from Greece around the turn of the century. You can see back in the day they actually wore fezzes because of the Ottoman style dress and customs and culture that they lived with for centuries. And if you come right here,
I'm just going to give a little view of all these ones.
Of course.
It's so interesting.
In this one photo from the Negrin family from 1903, you can see within 1 to 2 generations the change in the cultures as Greece was becoming a modern state and getting its independence from the Ottoman Empire, and the influence of Western thinking and culture and French influence. You can see the old style dress with the fur collar and the fez of the patriarch of the Negrin family, but then you see the children with the more modern Western style suits and dresses.
That's fascinating. Wow. You can see all that in one picture.
Exactly. So we try to tell the story, the history, the changing cultures and traditions of this community. I mean, you know, no community is static at any time. We're living on layers of history and evolution and influence from all different cultures around Greece and the Balkans. And so we see that, and we try to teach people how that gets reflected in our practices today.
Amazing.
This is a traditional sewing machine. So both in Greece and when they came here to America, a lot of Greek Jews were involved in the garment industry. And so this is...
How come?
That's a good question. I think that was just one of the trades that they were involved with in textiles generally in certain cities in Greece. And then also here in America in the turn of the century, the garment industry in New York was, booming. So they got, working class jobs wherever they could to start building up an income for their families so that they could afford to bring back bring from Greece to America some of their relatives. And that's how people even built their whole livelihoods and started companies manufacturing garments and clothing here in New York City.
Mm. Great.
So if we go around to the other side, I'll tell you a little bit more of the customs.
And
if you look down,
for anyone who's tuning in now, we're at the second level of this Greek Romanian synagogue that we're visiting here in New York, and this is where the women tend to sit during the service. So can give a little peek down into what it looks like from here. Here's the sanctuary.
so back in the day when they first founded this community, during services it was standing room only.
Wow.
We're surrounded by tenements, and back in the turn of the century through the 1940s and 50s, it was predominantly Greek Jews that lived in these buildings, and every apartment had a different family. Everybody knew each other. So the stories I'm told is that family members used to live literally across the window right there and listen in some of the mothers into the services.
Wow.
So basically, those that immigrated here, it was like a little village that they established on these few blocks here on the Lower East Side, and this is one of the vestiges of what that community looked like when we were concentrated here.
It's amazing.
So I'll show you a couple artifacts also. One viewer asked about traditions for Pesach.
Right.
And so this is a traditional metal tray that was used for cooking. Some people guess that it's a Seder tray, but it's actually not. It's used to make...
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, so we also make things called Bermuelos in Spanish, which is fried dough. On Hanukkah we eat it. In Greek it's lukumades. On Passover we make it out of matzah meal. And so these are used to make the individual little patties. And we also use it to make the leek patties, the burgers that I mentioned earlier, the keftikas de prasa.
Amazing.
One other custom that viewers might be familiar with is cupping, which is still common among Asian communities today, and Michael Phelps
you mean
also.
Where they put the little things and they
So
leave
yeah,
marks?
so back in the day, they used to light a little flame, and depending on what you were sick with, they would put it on your skin, and it was supposed to extract all of the bacteria, they were told, but it's still used in a lot of homeopathic medicine.
Did you try it?
I've never done it.
Me neither. I'm a little scared because I'm scared it's going to leave a permanent mark.
No, I don't think it's permanent. I'm told it feels a little interesting.
Yeah, it sounds strange. I don't know. It's not for me.
We have right here traditional handmade shoes that women would wear when they go to the mikveh in Janina. And the custom is actually very similar to Ottoman-style wooden shoes. And you can see it's got handmade pearl inlaid into the wood, as well as some of the vests and fezzes that were common in the turn of the century.
I mean, why are these so raised, the shoes? Like
That's a good question. I'm not sure exactly. I think it might have been the style or for decoration. It was. I don't believe they actually wore these into the mikveh. It was more so when they were in the hammam, the Turkish bath, or going towards the mikveh. It was kind of like what we might think of as a spa today.
Okay.
They would wear it while they were preparing or, in the mikveh at the time.
Oh, I see.
So, as I mentioned, this exhibit with the blue boards also features what the world was like when they came here to the Lower East Side in the early 1900s. So, these photos are from the early 1930s. This is the synagogue right here. This is across the street. Actually, on Allen Street around the corner, there used to be an elevated subway line that was torn down in the late 1930s. But most of the buildings that were there are still here today. They just have different immigrant groups. They have new businesses. They're a lot more expensive today in the Lower East Side than they were 100 years ago. So the joke that we like to say is that 100 years ago, the families that lived here lived in such cramped quarters they couldn't wait to get out of the Lower East Side and move to bigger apartments or live the American dream and buy a home of their own. But today, with New York City so desirable, the grandchildren of those immigrant families are moving back and paying 10 or 100 times more what they paid in rent back then. So that's the
Pretty
changing
crazy
New York
if you're
City.
thinking about it. Wow.
So if you want to come this way, these are some photos of leaders and rabbis of our community. Rabbi Cohen, Rabbi Esther, Rabbi Kol Hamida from Janina, Rabbi Levi. And this is a photo of our spiritual leader, Hai Jani, who was president and led the services for 50 years. He passed away in 2006, but it's really because of him and his leadership that we're here today. Hai led the synagogue as a volunteer for 50 years, like I mentioned, but also kept it alive with challenges of New York City and the Lower East Side in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, when there was a lot of crime on the Lower East Side, when there were Jews fleeing the Lower East Side. So it was really because of him and his family that he kept this place going and that he kept it alive for us to continue and form the museum in late 1990s and continue our traditions and tell the story to the world. So this exhibit features a little bit about Hai. He had a tailor shop a block away. He was born on Orchard Street, so he lived his entire life on the Lower East Side. And actually 2 years ago, after a lot of efforts and organizing, we were able to convince the city to rename our block Hai Jani Way in honor of all that he did to keep the synagogue alive. So
that's amazing.
We had a dedication in fall 2016, and here you can see a photo of the dedication when we put up the street sign on the corner.
Wow, that's great.
And his family was from Janina. So one of the unique traditions of the Jews from Janina, the Romaneochews specifically, was what's called an Aleph, which you can see right here. And we have a couple more I'll show you. But an Aleph is basically a birth certificate for boys, or almost like an amulet for baby boys. And so it was created to protect the baby, it was believed, for the first 40 days after they were born. So it contains a lot of different prayers. It has the Shema. It has the names of the patriarchs, Adam, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe, and the matriarchs, their wives, Eve and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Tzipporah. It has a lot of Kabbalistic influence. It has names of angels on it. And so this was a custom that was 100% unique to the Romaneochews, and they actually carried it over here to the Lower East Side and continued it through, I believe, the 1930s.
That's really
So
interesting.
this is another one that was donated from the Eliasov family. They're similar motifs, but they were all handmade, so the art and the decoration is, each one is unique. But a lot of them share similar text in it, including the names of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. Here are a couple other ones.
Yeah, they're really nicely decorated. Looks like a ketubah almost.
It kind of is. But we're trying to recreate the tradition so that when we have new children here in the community, we can keep the tradition alive with giving an Aleph.
Wow.
I'll show you this also. One of the community families here, the Negrin Family, which was a common name among Romaneochews, came to New York in the 1950s after World War II, after surviving. And this is the trunk that they came with.
Wow.
And so imagine they came on a plane, but people 100 years ago came on a ship, bringing all their belongings, everything they owned, in a trunk like this to a world they had never been and not sure what they were going to see.
Yeah, that's hard to imagine. It really is. Wow.
So let's go back this way a little bit.
Yeah.
This is another trunk from the Negrin family, and you can still see on the side the stickers when they came through the ports of Naples and when they left Greece that they would slap onto the side of the trunk on their travels. So that's the highlights of the tour of our synagogue and museum. If you'd like to learn more, of course, you can go to our website, kkjsm.org, and we have a whole host of archives about the Jews of Janina, the Jews of Greece, Like I said, we have programs here throughout the year. We have services, we have educational events, we have our festival, we have services for holidays, and anyone from throughout the world is always welcome. You can sign up to our mailing list. You can keep updated on the Greek Jewish world, and anytime you're in New York, definitely stop by and say hello so we could teach you more.
Amazing. Thank you so much for giving us this great tour.
Of course.
And thanks for everyone who watched. I'm Josephine Dolston for JTA News.